Today's show is brought to you by Audible, and right now you can get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/joined-up. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle or MP3 player. Thanks for tuning in to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, a weekly show featuring interviews with fantastic authors sharing their personal stories on how and why they write. There's hints and tips for aspiring writers and great book reviews from top bloggers. Follow us on Twitter at JU Podcast. Right, cue the cheesy theme tune.
Put down your pen and stop your typing. Grab yourself a drink, 'cause it's Joined Up Writing.
Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 74 with Matt Wesolowski talking about his latest book, Hydra, a creepy crime horror crossover based around a fictional podcast. And there'll also be time for another trip to Book Bloggers Corner with show regular Catherine Sunderland reviewing The Fear by C.L. Taylor. Before we dive in, I wanted to recommend another podcast I recently stumbled across, which is Script Notes. It's a long-running show hosted by two successful Hollywood screenwriters, and there's something to be learned regardless of whether you're writing scripts or fiction, to be honest. They delve into things like story structure, character, suspense, and loads of other writing-related topics, so definitely give it a go. In fact, it was one of the most recent shows entitled Knowing versus Discovery that got me thinking about my own writing process. One particular comment really hit home for me, which was when one of the hosts said, "Anyone who thinks writing can be an efficient process is very much mistaken." And the reason that resonated with me is because I've been really working hard on my novel over the past several weeks, every day, as I mentioned recently, and spending a lot of time in the heads of my characters. I've also trashed thousands of words of what I'm now calling my zero draft. And even though I thought I was very much in the editing phase of the process, in the last week alone I've written thousands of brand new words and several new scenes. And before I heard that little aside on the Script Notes podcast, I was giving myself a really hard time about the amount of stuff I'm taking out and the fact that I thought the main story should be finished by now. But the fact of the matter is, if I hadn't gone down some of those blind alleys and explored all that unknown territory, I wouldn't have got to where I am now, which is being close to something that's just so much better than that initial draft. You know, my timeline makes more sense, my characters have gained depth, and the underlying themes of the book are really starting to resonate through the whole novel. And getting yourself into that mindset, realising that this big, messy process that we go through is what gets you to a better book, can help you deal with self-doubt, I think, and it encourages you to keep working hard to finish the next draft. So my advice this week is be messy, be inefficient, explore all that unknown territory, and do it in the knowledge that it will improve your final draft. And that's irrespective of whether you consider yourself a plotter or a pantser. Even you planners can benefit from letting your characters go off-piste from time to time. Character-driven stories are what make good stories great, in my opinion. So what are your thoughts on all of that? Do you beat yourself up for rewriting and throwing away words and ideas? How inefficient or otherwise is your process? Why don't you tweet me at JU Podcast to tell me about your experiences, or drop me a line at wayne@waynekellywrites.com. Alternatively, head over to joinedupwriting.co.uk and get in touch there. Right, on to today's interview with Matt Wesolowski. Matt is an author from Newcastle in the UK. He's an English tutor who leads creative writing workshops for young people in association with New Writing North. He started his writing career in horror, and his short horror fiction has been published in Ethereal Tales magazine, Midnight Movie Creature Feature Anthology, and many, many more. He was a winner of the Pitch Perfect competition at Bloody Scotland Crime Writing Festival in 2015, and his first novel, 6 Stories, was released in 2017. His latest, Hydra, is a follow-up of sorts. We talk about that in the show, and it's just released on Orenda Books. Okay, Matt, thanks a million for joining us on Joined Up Writing Podcast. Really appreciate it. How's things been going?
Things have been going really well, actually. It's all starting to hit right now. I've had some the blog tour for Hydra has just finished, and I'm about to get a 5-hour train journey tomorrow up to Aberdeen to the start of my appearance at some book festivals up to Granite Noir.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I mean, not the 5-hour train journey, but,
Hey, you know what? It is brilliant because I get time to read.
Yeah,
because
I know what
it's
you mean,
so hard, and it's nice to have that little bit of time just to sit and get completely absorbed in a book, because those times we don't tend to have in our lives that much.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. No, it's great. As long as you've got a seat, that's absolutely fine. 5 hours on a train when you haven't got a seat is obviously not so great. But I agree. I love travelling by train when I get the chance, but it doesn't happen that often. But that sounds fantastic. Well, normally what I would do at this point is I would get you to tell me straight away initially about your most recent book. But I think in your case, it probably makes more sense to go back to the first book, 6 stories. So tell me a little bit about that, because obviously it's such an original format that you've got for kind of both books. It's almost like a series, really. So tell me a little bit about that, how it came about, and how you went on this, using this different format and this approach.
Well, the format was completely just an idea that I had because I was quite late to the party with True Crime Podcast, and someone told me to listen to Serial, and I'd never even heard of it. Mm-hmm. And I listened to it and was completely, like most people, were completely hooked by it, totally absorbed by it, because I think it was one of the first of its kind, the sort of investigative true crime podcasts where it went on week by week and you found more, and it gradually built up a picture of what had happened, and it was wonderful. And I thought, what an interesting way of storytelling. Ever since I've been a little kid, I've been into audiobooks, big long car journeys. I was always sat, I have distinct memories of listening to cassettes of things like Beaver Towers by Nigel Hinton, which are just wonderful children's books, and just staring out of windows, listening to these and being completely absorbed. So when podcasts started getting bigger, it really did that same sort of thing to me. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to see if I could write a book in that style? And it was kind of an experiment just to see if it would work. And I wrote it really quickly in a few months, and then just kind of put it away because I was like, this is just weird. It was like a weird little experiment, this deformed little creature that I'd created. And I thought, well, no one's going to want this, but when someone like a proper writer does it, which would inevitably happen, at least I could say I did it first, Yeah,
absolutely. And so when you didn't start out writing a straight novel, you say it just came out like that. Did you ever consider actually producing it as an audio book or as a podcast or anything?
I thought it would be an idea to send it in script format to perhaps like BBC Writers' Room or radio, something like that. But I've tried writing scripts, and it's just not my forte. I thought it'd be great if someone else adapted it than me. Yeah. But again, it was just to see what it would be like, to see what would happen. I honestly didn't think anything would happen, because I was like sending horror manuscripts off. I've got these 2 great big 120k word horror manuscripts that have been consistently rejected by every horror agent worth their salt. And it was between the editing of 2 of those that I wrote 6 stories as just a sort of like a mess about, really.
Yeah, like a bit of a fun project.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe what gave it, because I didn't have that pressure, that relentless pressure that I put on myself constantly. I wasn't doing that. I just kind of wrote it as a bit of fun. Just to see what would happen, really.
Yeah, it's interesting because I haven't. It's fairly recently I've been, not that this is particularly original in terms of an audio thing, because people have already done this in an audio format in terms of mockumentaries and things, but I've been looking for an excuse to write a little audio drama, because I'm a huge fan of, like you, I like all the true crime podcasts and that kind of stuff, but I also really like the audio drama stuff that you get in podcast form now. I don't know whether you've listened to things like Steal the Stars and Life After, and
no.
I'll give you some recommendations after the show, but there's some really, really good ones, and it's the kind of thing I do editing and stuff as part of my day job anyway, and I thought, if I could probably get a couple of people to act in it, or I could come up with something where there's only 1 or 2 voices, I thought about doing it, but I would never have thought of doing it as a book, funnily enough. And it is the kind of thing, like I remember I mentioned to you on Twitter, but when Catherine actually reviewed the book and she talked about it, I thought, well, it just sounds so strange. I can't sort of imagine how it would work, and yet it does. It's one of those things. Once you get into the format of it, it is almost like you hear it in your head, which obviously is how reading works anyway. But you do sort of imagine it as a podcast.
I'm really glad, because that was like the major worry when I wrote the book, was that you wouldn't be able to hear it. I was really worried that when people read it, it would just be awkward, it would be clunky, it wouldn't sound like a podcast. And there was a lot of times where I would listen to an episode of Serial and I would note down just sort of little bits of structure, like when Sarah Koenig would pause the audio of the interview and then do a bit of narration, because it gave it this wonderful rhythm that I tried to replicate. It's like Six Stories is very similar, I think, in structure to Serial. And I think it's that rhythm that I wanted to capture. So I'm glad that kind of worked.
It does. I don't know whether it was a conscious thing or not, and I haven't read Six Stories yet, and I've got 4% left of Hydra, and I'm really enjoying it. I really wanted to get it finished before I did the podcast, but I run out of time. But the thing that I did notice was, I would say that as opposed to like Serial or something like that, it's not quite as... not complicated is not the right word, but in Serial and things like that, sometimes they have lots of cuts and lots of multiple voices cutting in one after another, because you can sort of do that, because obviously as soon as someone starts to speak, you know that it's a different person. And I think if you'd have tried to replicate it to that degree, I think it probably would have become confusing. But most of the time, whether you've got it's more like a dialogue, isn't it? It's usually one person and Scott King, the host, and I think that works really, really well.
Yeah, I think that was definitely a consideration when I was writing it as a thing to read, because like you say, too many voices in there that would just cloud everything. And while with the joys of audio, everyone's got different voices and different intonation and different accents. And I think if you're reading that could become perhaps tiresome or just confusing.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's the thing with it. But it works really, really well, and it's got a really, really original spin on it. So bearing in mind, so as you say, you went off and almost did this as kind of a fun project, if you like, and in between the middle of the serious things that you were writing. What about when you decided you were going to try and pitch it, or you were going to? Tell me about how that worked, and did you think, well, this is just a bit weird and it's probably not going to get anywhere? How did you approach that?
Well, that was just kind of plucked out of the ether, really. A friend of mine sent me a link to this competition for Bloody Scotland Crime Festival, and it was for an event called Pitch Perfect, where you go there and you pitch your crime novel to a panel of industry people, publishers and agents and that sort of thing. And I remember getting that email off her. She'd forwarded it to me and almost going, oh, I'm not even a crime writer. I'm not a crime writer, because I did not consider myself a crime writer. And I thought, well, there's no point doing this. But I thought, I've got this daft little thing. Why not?
Yeah.
And the competition was write 100 words about your novel, send it to us and we'll judge it. And I wrote it, I think, in 2 minutes. And I'm not bragging. I'm not saying, but it was brilliant. I didn't really care that much. Yeah. I just kind of wrote it because I think if you don't enter these things, if you don't try everything, then what's the point? I mean, that's all I've ever wanted to do, is be a writer and be published and everything. And I thought, if opportunities come along, I'm not going to not take them. So I just did it and sent it and then forgot about it. And then I got this email saying you have to come to Stirling and pitch. And I was like, oh my God. I couldn't remember who had done the crime. What happened? And I have this memory because I couldn't get anywhere to stay in Stirling because I didn't know anything about these crime festivals. This just wasn't my world.
No.
And I had to get this hotel about 10 miles out of Stirling in the middle of nowhere where there was no internet, no phone signal. And I've just got this recollection of pacing this hotel room the night before with this pitch going, are they even going to like it? I don't know what crime people want. And going, all I'm just going to have to do is throw everything into it. Luckily, I'd made some notes about who had done the crime and why. I had to reread the whole manuscript. And then went in front of these industry people. It was terrifying. And then I got approached by Karen Sullivan afterwards, and she gave me some of her books. It was Paul Hardisty's book and Kati Capeldo's books. And had a really nice chat to me. And it was lovely. And she gave me a card and said, by the way, will you send me the manuscript? And I thought she was just being polite. So I nearly didn't send it. I thought she was taking pity on me.
No, they don't do that. They've not got enough time to do that.
This is it. So I sent them, I kind of tidied up the manuscript because it was a mess. This was a first draft. And sent it to her. And then it kind of went from there. I heard back and I was like, oh my God.
That's fantastic. It's fantastic. So when did you realise, so you go from, as you say, you're ostensibly, well, at least in your mind at the time, and I know you've written lots of horror short stories, and I think you've written for magazines and things as well, haven't you? Is that right?
Yeah.
And
I've written like a lot of stuff for various like anthologies and independent published zines and that sort of thing. Yeah.
So you go from that, you've got these 2 horror books and everything else, and you just say this is a bit of a dalliance or whatever, and then at what point did the topic about have you got any more of these, or are you thinking of doing a follow-up to the first one?
Well, you know what, after I thought 6 Stories was going to be the only one, and I had it in my head that it was going to be the only one, and I'd started this other book because almost like 6 Stories was the weird little experiment. Now I'm going to do something proper, you know. Yeah. So I've got another crime novel. It's probably the most horrible thing I've ever written. Kind of hanging on the hard drive waiting. And I thought I'm not going to do any more 6 Stories. I thought that's going to be it. And then I was mopping my kitchen floor one day, as you do, and listening to a podcast about Jennifer Pan. And I don't know if you know about the Jennifer Pan.
Not by name. What's that about?
She was a student who, her parents were very pushy. They were what's described as dragon parents, where they kind of push their children to work really hard and achieve academically. And their love was almost conditional. It was that sort of parenting. And she ended up hiring some lads to come and kill her family.
Jesus.
It was such a hard-hitting case. But I was mopping my floor, cleaning my house and listening to this podcast, and something just clicked. And I thought, what an interesting way of looking at something. Why would someone kill their family? And it was that question of why would someone kill their family who ostensibly has a nice life and is privileged, and what goes on in families? What's that darkness in families? And I thought, that's something.
And that's where it all came from.
Yeah, I don't tend to plan anything. I start with just a little spark, an idea, and I've still got the notebook where I just wrote down 21-year-old girl kills her family, why? And then I had to just start once the house was clean, of course.
Priorities.
Absolutely. Sorry, hang on. My cat is deciding to put her face on my face.
I have to shut mine out for that very reason.
Yeah. But yeah, and that was it. And then I just had to start writing, and that's where Hydra came from, really. As I say, there was no plan to write a second one. And there was no plan to write a third one either, but I'm halfway through that.
I thought I was going to ask you that. I had a figure. I suppose it is like that thing you've set this, it's kind of almost the perfect vehicle to tell, multiple stories, isn't it, really?
Yes, and I also think that it probably is a fleeting one. I don't think I'm going to continue with this format. I think it's a nice little original format, but I think I want to end it. If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And not just keep ploughing on doing the same thing.
So do you bearing in mind, obviously you've kind of got sucked into this now, like some of the characters in Hydra and in 6 Stories, you've got sucked into this thing now, and you've kind of got these other horror novels and things that are knocking around. Does that bother you, or do you want to go back? Obviously, you've still got them. Is that something you want to go back to, or is that still something you're interested in? I mean, obviously, without any spoilers or anything like that, there are kind of horror overtones in Hydra. I mean, I can't speak to 6 Stories, but in Hydra, there's definitely kind of those horror overtones. Yeah,
I think that's part of me. I think everything I write is going to have a darkness to it and is going to have a horror to it. Which I don't force in. I don't think, I have to put a horror in. What horror element?
No, of course not. No.
It has to come naturally, and I think that's part of the way I write and what I like to read. I mean, I read a lot of horror I've been reading a lot more crime these days.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's some wonderful authors who infuse the two. Yrsa Sigurdardottir, for example, is wonderful at having that horror-based horror element into crime. And I don't know. I mean, I'd like to write a horror novel, but it's always if that time's going to come, if that idea sparks. The old ones to look back on, I don't know, man. I mean, some of them I look back on now and think, well, no wonder everyone rejected it. It's awful. But that's what you do. That's what you do as a writer. Of course it is.
That's how you get better, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think maybe those novels need to be consigned to the hard drive of the soul, and they were building blocks. They were learning curves, learning blocks. Blocky curves. Yeah, exactly.
Curvy blocks.
Curvy blocks. Yeah, absolutely. They were the Lego. They were the Duplo to the Lego. Oh gosh.
Yeah, we might be stretching the metaphor a bit, but I definitely understand what you mean. I've got the same thing. I know what you're talking about. So you mentioned there about, and I think I saw in another interview that you did where you talked about the fact that you're not really a planner. And that I think the way you described it was a lot of your stories have died that way.
Absolutely.
And I know what you mean as well. I'm similar. But do you find as a consequence of that, do you find you've got a longer editing process?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like when I've finished something, I've learned through the years and from loads of advice from much more established writers than me that finishing stuff is really important. And no matter how tangled and frayed it is, that it's really important to get it finished, because then you can go back and edit. It's when things don't get finished. When I was at university, I was part of the University Writers Guild. It was just basically a society for creative writers, and we would read each other's stuff and critique each other. And I was notorious for never finishing anything.
Well, it is like you say, but I would say that was probably the most common thing with, especially writers when they first start out. It's such a big thing, because you get to a point, most people get to a point, you're sort of 2/3 of the way in, sometimes it's halfway, but somewhere between halfway and 2/3 of the way in, and you just think, where the hell am I going with this? This has gone off in all directions. It's a complete mess. I need to start trying to fix it now.
Yes.
And it's the worst thing that you can do. And you as you say, and you just completely lose faith in it. You just think, this is an absolute piece of crap.
Yeah, because you've got all these different edges that are frayed, and you've got all these different characters going somewhere, and you're like, well, what am I going to do with that? And actually, once you finish things, I find personally that those ends almost tie themselves up without any effort. It's when you start putting effort into trying to go back and go, well, if this happens, this must happen. That's where you lose it. If you just keep going, you just keep on, and you get to the end, and it might be awful. But I mean,
I've had characters dying and things, not main characters, but I've had that with the crime novel that I'm writing now. Basically, I killed off a character, because I thought at the time, well, that kind of fits with the plot, and that'll make it interesting, and that's a nice little plot twist there.
Yeah.
And then by the time I got to the end of the novel, I'm like, I really need that person. So he just came back to life. It's just in it. And I didn't even realise I'd done it for a while. I think I was like a few chapters on. And then I thought, hang on, he died. He died several chapters ago.
His name was Jon Snow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But that's the thing. Like, that doesn't matter, because then you can go back, can't you? And we'll pave over his death.
Absolutely, yeah. It was just a cold.
Yeah, that's it. Or you could turn it into something else. What's that? The zombie legend comes from that poison that used to be administered to people that would make everyone believe they were dead. You've got all sorts of options.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it usually becomes more interesting, as you say, because of that. And you just find a way. As you say, you just have to finish it. It is the hardest. It is the hardest thing to do, because for me, and I think for a lot of people, it's self-doubt is the hardest thing to push past. It's just the constant. It's particularly in the first draft. Once you've kind of got some kind of first draft, you think, well, I've got a book, kind of. There's something there. There's a story there, but before that, you just think, I can't do this. I just can't do it.
No, absolutely. I mean, that was the thing with Hydra. So whilst I was writing, so I wrote it really quickly. I wrote Hydra in 3 months, just plowing through it. And all my brain was telling me was like, you're a one-trick pony. 6 stories was luck. It was pure luck. This one, all people are going to say is that it's not as good. And you're going to fall into an abyss of obscurity. You had your chance, and it was just that relentless. And I was like, I'm just going to finish it. I'm just going to finish it and see what happens. But we were talking about characters and the not knowing in both of the novels. I mean, I didn't know who killed who in 6 stories until I was writing episode 5, till I was nearly at the end.
Yeah.
And I'd sort of gone, oh my God, I've tied off all the ends here. I don't know what's going to happen. And you just keep going, and then suddenly it hits you.
Yeah, and it's weird. I do think it is weird. It is like your brain, it's like the back part of your brain knows before you do. I've had that a number of times. Like, I've written some really innocuous piece of description. You know, I remember doing it once in one of my early novels that, again, it's living in my hard drive, never to see the light of day. But I remember writing in something about a trophy or something being on a shelf and all these different things. And I didn't pay any attention to it. And then I wrote myself into a corner. And then all of a sudden the character takes the trophy off the thing and hits someone over the head with it. And I thought, well, you know, that's how I got out of it. There must have been a reason that I told myself to put that thing on there. I don't know whether that's true or not, but it does feel like that sometimes.
It does. No, you're absolutely right. Like those little things, that's such a good example of when that happens. And then afterwards you go, oh yes, I was foreshadowing.
Yeah, I knew that.
Yeah. Genius. Yeah. But no, it's all right. And I think like there's a lot to be said about the subconscious mind. Must do something like that. It must start making these little neural connections when you're panicking and chastising yourself over the keyboard.
Yeah,
back there in the grey matter, something's plotting, you know.
Well, and I think it is kind of how, you know, real life works to a certain extent. You get yourself in a jam of some description, you know, you have to think quick to get out of it, and you know, if you're in that situation, if you've got an imagination and you put yourself in the situation, you think, well, what options are available? What can I do? What can the character do to extricate themselves from that, or whatever it is? And so, you know, I think a lot of it does come from that, and it should be driven by that, and obviously by the character. It's like, what would that character do?
Yeah, and sometimes they act in strange ways and you don't expect them to, or different people pop up that you didn't expect. And that's kind of fun. That's really when you're sort of in that flow of writing, when characters just start acting by themselves. You know, you've built them up and then you kind of let them go. It's wonderful.
It is. It's the best part of first draft writing. It's the bit that's actually enjoyable before it gets all complicated near the end.
Oh yeah, when you've got to apply logic. It's so annoying.
I said recently I was hunched over the kitchen table, bemoaning, trying to edit my novel, and I kept tutting and huffing and puffing, and my wife said, "What's the matter?" And I'm like, writing a novel, it's just hard. You have to think. You really have to think hard.
It is. And like when you were saying before about giving up halfway through and 2/3 through, it's because it's hard work.
It is.
And like writing for a job, which unfortunately I don't get to do yet full time, but it's what we want. But it's like a job. You have to work at it. You can't just sit there and wait for the muse to strike.
No,
you know
absolutely not. No.
You have to sit and slog, and you have to sit and write, and you get a few thousand words done. You go, I've written, like yesterday, I had a few hours in the afternoon. So I sat and thought, brilliant, I can just fly through this. I wrote 600 words of absolute twaddle, like awful, just the worst.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at my word count at the end of these few hours, which I'd ground out, and just going, oh my God, I've deleted half of it now, you know, but that's what it is. It
is like that sometimes, but you do have to show up every day. That's the thing with it.
Yes.
I mean, I often find that the times, I think sometimes, especially like you, I've got a day job and I have to fit my writing around that and all that. And sometimes when you get those blocks of time, like you said, a few hours, like to us that's like absolute, you know, manna from heaven. It's like, oh my god, I've got this few hours that I can do this thing with. But in a way it's kind of harder because I think you put more pressure on it. It's like, oh my god, I've got 3 hours of like, I've not got any interruptions, I've actually got to do this thing, so it's got to be incredibly productive, and I've got to have written thousands and thousands of words or whatever. Or edited loads and loads and loads of chapters or whatever it is that you're doing. And I think sometimes you kind of set yourself up to fail before you even get going with it, because you just put so much pressure on yourself.
I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, I think like sometimes when you get 1 hour and you just go, I'll just finish off this little bit. You write 2,000 words in an hour and it's brilliant. Because you have, like you say, you haven't got that pressure. What is your day job, by the way?
I do video production, so predominantly like corporate and promotional and all that kind of stuff. So I have to write scripts, although most of them are, you know, not particularly interesting. You know, shoe factory videos and things like that, or whatever. Some are more interesting than others, but I'm okay. I can write scripts and I can write dialogue and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's just a different part of your brain that you have to use. But,
absolutely.
But it's not a 9 to 5. What is it that you do?
See, I'm a bit the same as in, and I'm a one-to-one tutor for looked after children, so teenagers in care. Right. So I work really erratic hours because I drive out to various different schools across Newcastle and sit and do one-to-one English tuition. So it might be, one day I might be working like 10:30 till 11:30, and that's it. Yeah. Or I might be like all over different parts of Newcastle working with various different pupils. So again, it's pretty erratic. So my hours, and I've got a little boy as well for half the week. So I've got these sort of, and it's having those golden few hours where I have to do amazing writing in this time. Yeah,
well, as I say, I think we put a lot of pressure on stuff. You know, there are lots of people that they're perfectly happy. I'm not criticising them or anything, but you know, they go to work, they come home and they watch TV or whatever it is that they do in their leisure time, and they're perfectly fine with that. And it's only like,
I'm jealous of that.
I know, we could jealous. You know, we put pressure on, you know, how much writing did you do last week? Well, you know, I only did like 2 hours in the whole week or whatever. And it's like, but we've got busy jobs, and I've got a family and stuff as well. But you have to show up. I mean, I often find that the most productive times often are when I really don't want to do it. You know, I think, I'm tired or whatever, and I think, right, I will just do 15 minutes, or I'll just do half an hour. That's all I'm going to do. You know, I've done the thing with the timer as well on my phone. I do that sometimes. Yeah. And when I tend to do that, I find, you know, I write for an hour and I get loads of stuff done. Because Absolutely. Once I start going and there is no pressure, and it's like, well, you weren't really going to do anything anyway. So if you get 50 words or 100 words or something, then it's something else, isn't it, or whatever. Yeah. So that's sometimes a way to. It's sort of like you have to trick yourself into it.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's pause there to take a quick break and grab a review in this week's Book Bloggers Corner. Today, Catherine Sunderland, aka Bibliomaniac, is reviewing C.L. Taylor's The Fear.
This is the BBC Book Bloggers Corner.
The Fear by C.L. Taylor. C.L. Taylor is one of my favourite authors. I think she's the queen of the psychological thriller. This was one of my most anticipated novels to read this year, but I was not disappointed. Taylor's prose is flawless, compelling, and flows with a confidence that ensures the reader cannot turn away until the very last page. The storyline is expertly delivered with a perfect understanding of pace, timing, and structure. The characters are convincing, and the reader quickly forms a relationship with the main characters, eager to find out how the story may play out. The Fear is a story of Lou Wandsworth, now 32, but still unable to move on from her traumatic past. When Lou was a schoolgirl, she ran away to France with her teacher, Mike Hughes, who she thought was the love of her life, only to find out that he was not what he seemed. The story moves between Lou as a teenager and Lou as an adult. The present-day narrative deals with what happens when Lou discovers that Mike is involved with a teenager and decides it's time to confront him for the damage he's caused her. But Mike is a sinister predator, a really unnerving and dangerous character, and it isn't long before Lou finds herself once again becoming his prey as he desperately tries to bring them to justice. Master of cliffhangers, suspense and tension, with this novel Taylor is now completely in her stride. This book delivers a story with characters that provoke strong reactions from the reader and a storyline that has you tearing at the next page. Once more, Taylor confirms herself as one of my go-to authors, and for this I'm giving her a 5-star rating. The Fear is a great book, highly readable and definitely worth adding to your pile this year.
Book Bloggers Corner.
So let's get back to my chat with Matt Wesolowski, where I talked to Matt about some of the horror elements of his crime fiction. With Hydra, there are kind of, there's a darkness to it, and there are kind of horror elements, and it reminded me of a little bit. It's almost like the found footage kind of genre, because obviously you've spliced in, as well as the podcast, you've kind of spliced in, again, I won't give any spoilers, but you've kind of spliced in these other, transcripts of other audio recordings and things that kind of cut into the narrative. Again, did you, in terms of like structuring it and stuff, was a lot of that kind of retrofitted? Did you find that you could almost write some of that out of sequence? If you were doing like a transcript from Arla or something, you could, or was it right now for this bit to get me from A to B, I need a thing in here where, a transcript from Arla or whatever it might be?
No, it was quite linear. Like Hydra was written in a really linear way, where between each podcast, as it were, like you say, there's these transcripts, and they were almost they sort of helped push the plot along for me. And sometimes it was great writing those because it helped me almost reset into working with the next character. Sometimes they were really hard to work with because I wanted to show Arla's state of mind, as it were, and that was hard to make that sound authentic. And I was very worried about, I didn't want to use any sort of cliches, and I didn't want to disrespect, and that was quite a hard write. The rest of it, there's bits from documentaries and
that's right,
news reports and all sorts of the way through. I just like that. I like that almost found footage. I like that in documentaries. I love a documentary, and that's my favorite thing to watch.
Me too. Yeah, I love it
in the world.
Yeah,
like if you go on documentaryheaven.com, and it's just the best, and there's just everything. I'm always looking for the perfect documentary. It's always about something horrible. Something that's going to make me sad and keep me awake.
The darker, the better. So, would you ever be interested in making it? Well, I'm guessing, is there an audiobook version of this actually?
6 Stories is on Audible, and Hydra's coming, I think it's on the 27th of February.
Oh, brilliant. And so have you had a chance to have a listen to that yet? Or
like when 6 Stories first came on, I got it and started listening. I remember just walking around the house, like skipping bits, and just because it was so weird hearing someone else, because all these voices are
you've got them in your head.
And I had to put that aside because I had to go, these voices aren't going to be the voices I thought of, so I need to put that to the side and listen. And just hearing my own words, it was excruciating. I haven't been able to listen to the whole thing, not because of the actors or anything like
I understand what you're
They're
saying.
Fantastic, but it's because it's my words read out, and the public are going to hear them. I just find it very peculiar still.
Tough to do. Well, I can't believe, Ian Rankin, obviously he's been, the amount of time that he's been going, he claims he's still to this day, he's never watched any of the TV adaptations.
Right.
He's not watched any of them. And the reason is that he doesn't want, that's not what he wants going around his head, because he still writes Rebus.
Yes.
And he doesn't want that, when he sits down to write, because there's always the story about the guy that wrote Morse, Colin Dexter, is it?
I think so, yes. I don't know. I've never watched an episode of Morse.
You know what? I've not. It's kind of a little bit before my time. I sort of remember it when I was growing up, but I didn't really get into it. But he was still writing the books when Morse started coming on TV and became really popular. And he basically said that within, a really short space of time, when he sat down to write the next book, it was basically John Thor
Oh
was
man.
Morse. Basically usurped whoever he had in his mind and what they looked like and everything else. And even he said it even affected the way that he wrote the character and the things that he did and the way that he spoke and everything.
I can imagine that's true, like, because when you see that, when you've got it in your head, then you see it on telly. That's what everyone's going to see.
Well, it's kind of like when you read something, is it, that's been adapted as a film or TV, or if you do it the other way around, if you watch the TV or film version first, then you read the book.
Yeah.
You know, you've got the actor going around in your mind. It's weird.
It is.
So that's interesting because presumably then with 6 stories, well, and Hydra, they've done it. So they've got multiple actors and they've.
Yeah, it's really cool. They've got the same guy. The audiobook of Hydra was going to come out earlier, but they got the same guy to play Scott King, who played him in 6 stories.
Oh, brilliant.
So I like that. I like the consistency. I had a nice Twitter message off the woman, the actress who played Arla, actually. And she was, it was lovely. And she was saying how much she enjoyed reading it. And she'd been in Doctor Who, I believe.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, I'll not reveal anything. Just we'll wait till it comes out. But it's pretty exciting, you know. Yeah, it's really cool. But I have this sense of like these people have gone and read my stuff. They've they've worked and gone and done it. I just really hope that they enjoyed it.
That's what happens. You wrote it. It's out there in the world now, and people can. Yeah. Well, people are obviously enjoying it, and like I say, I enjoyed it. I thought it was great. I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting with the audiobook thing in general. There's been quite a lot of discussion recently that, in some ways, the audiobook kind of format is still fairly old-fashioned. It hasn't really changed. You know, you talked about when you were younger and you were listening to cassettes and things, and most of the time it is just a single actor reading the book. You know, and I'm not saying. I mean, I love audiobooks. I've got a subscription to Audible, and I love it.
Yeah, same.
And a good actor can really, really bring something to life when they read it on their own. Anyway, but I do think that we will start to see more things like this. I know with Chalkman, which I listened to recently.
Yeah, same.
So obviously that's got the 2 actors. And again, when that first started, I was a bit. I'm not sure this is going to work because I thought it was interesting how they let I forget the actor's name. It's the guy that played Moriarty, isn't it, in Sherlock Holmes, who's brilliant. And I thought, well, he's kind of using his own because he's Irish. He's kind of using his accent. He's not really covering that up. But why is he Irish when he's older? But as it got on, it was just so well performed. It just it just really, really worked. You know, you've got the young actor and the old actor, but I do think we will start to see more of that because I think audiobooks definitely are becoming more and more popular.
I think audio as a whole.
Absolutely,
With podcasts now, you've got a free app on your phone with free stuff just constantly. So and really well produced free stuff. So I think something where you have to pay for audiobooks, then they need to step. You know, they need to.
You're going to step it up, yeah,
and keep it going. And like, to be fair, I can't think of a bad audiobook I've listened to, you know. I'm sure they're out there, but I don't remember ever going, I didn't enjoy that.
No, there's some I noted the only thing I've had fairly recently is some older ones, and I didn't sort of know that they were older. I mean, it's obvious really because the book's much, much older. Things like listening to some Michael Connelly's original Harry Bosch books. And they would have come out whenever they first came out or not long afterwards, and they are the way that they're performed are a little bit, I don't know. I don't want to be mean and say hammy, but it's a little bit like that.
It's just a different era, wasn't it? A different style. I have these wonderful recordings. They must have been off vinyl of these H.P. Lovecraft stories, and I used to. A few years ago, I used to sit and draw and paint and stuff like that. Not that I'm any good at it, but and just listening to these scratchy Lovecraft recordings, and they put like incidental music and odd like audio effects between them, and they were just so haunting and so well done. I know a tattooer actually who listens to a lot of audio books and Lovecraft when he's doing his designs. It's fantastic.
Yeah, they're really atmospheric. Well, I think we're going to talk about this a bit more in the epilogue episode, the bonus. We'll talk a bit more about podcasts. But just while I think about it, if you're interested, just purely out of curiosity as much as anything else. I came across recently Old Time Radio Mysteries
Oh yes, I have that.
on
I have
podcast.
that.
There's loads of different ones.
They're amazing.
Because they're the recording, the recordings of the original live, because they went out live, so there's like little mistakes and things in them, fluffs.
Oh, and you get like Vincent Price and stuff in
yeah,
there.
oh yeah, the one that I was listening to was James Mason, who's hilarious anyway.
They're
Yes,
so good.
darling, I'm coming in now. It's all like that.
And you get those wonderful old adverts, Laramie cigarettes,
That's it.
the smoothest. And they're so good.
There was
But
one-
old time radio is wonderful.
Barry's batteries or something. They love alliteration. The adverts are full of alliteration. But,
There's a charm to them, isn't there? There's a real sort of
brilliant. And some of them are like scored by like Bernard Herrmann and stuff like that. Did Hitchcock stuff. So yeah, they've got like really quite high production values.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I recommend checking those out. They're good anyway. So you mentioned that already in terms of like what's up next. So you're working on the third installment of 6 stories.
I am.
And have you got anything else in the pipeline, or what else is kind of?
So I have another manuscript that's finished in first draft, which I'm going to start editing once I've done with 6 stories 3, as it were. And as I say, it's not in the podcast format, but it is written from various different points of view, I think, and that wasn't a conscious decision. That's just sort of how it happened. I think that format does not escape me, that I can't escape from that format. Yeah. But it's quite nice to write. But like I say, I wanted it to sound authentic. It's about a murderer, and it's about how murderers are made. That fascinates me. What causes people in their childhood and in their adolescence to become evil, as it were. And I love that idea that people are thought of as born evil. And I'm really interested in that sort of thing. And this book really tackles that, looks at childhood and looks at the failure of people to notice when things are going wrong. I mean, if we look at that mass shooting in America that happened, there was something like 39 incidents of domestic violence in the house that the police attended leading up to it, which is a huge indicator that something and nothing was done. And it's that sort of thing where it's not trying to make a political statement about something like that, but just that.
Nothing's joined up. The services are not joined up in any way. Yeah,
and it's not their fault, the chronic underfunding of those sorts of services. But it just fascinates me. So I wrote this. It's like I say, the darkest thing I've ever written.
That's saying something, folks. If you've read Hydra,
see, I always thought like 6 stories in Hydra for me aren't for me. They're not particularly.
Well, I haven't read 6 stories, but Hydra, I would say it's creepy. Is how I would describe it. It's creepy. I mean that as a compliment. By the way.
Well, thank you. Yes. That's
so you've gone from you're not a crime writer, but so potentially you're working on your 4th crime book.
Yeah, I'm still not a crime writer. I don't know what I am, man. I'm just a writer.
Yeah, well, it's a bit like Stephen King, isn't it? I mean, I know he sort of transcends genre. I know he started off as a horror writer, but he's kind of done everything now. I mean, I don't know whether you've read his crime books, but his crime books are brilliant.
He's brilliant at everything, basically.
Yeah.
Just like, I mean, he is my hero.
Oh,
you know
he's
what I mean?
fantastic.
And he has been since I could read his stuff. And he is for many, many people. Did you see CJ Tudor?
I did on Twitter tonight,
Yeah, Stephen King tweeted about her.
That's huge, yeah.
That's wonderful. I mean, how good must that feel? And deservedly so, you know?
It's a great book, yeah.
It is, and like, but what that must feel like. So I know she's a King fan as well.
Yeah.
And like that just must feel amazing.
And the follow-up comment as well. He actually replied when she replied to him.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, she said, "Oh, this is some." I can't remember how she replied. This is incredible or whatever. And he basically said, "You rock."
Oh my God! Imagine
I mean, I'd just get it blown up, I think, and make a huge piece of artwork and stick it on the wall or something.
Yeah, I'd paint it on my chest and just walk around the street pointing at it.
So basically, for people listening that haven't got a clue what we're talking about, CJ Tudor, who I'm hoping to have on the show soon, actually, I've talked to her a few times about coming on. She got tweeted by Stephen King. Her book, The Chalkman, got tweeted by him and said how much he liked it. And then he also followed up by telling her that she rocks. So it's quite a big deal. So so that's fantastic. Well, good luck with all this stuff that you've got going on. Obviously, it's brilliant. So when have you got so when does the third? Well, which book comes out next? Presumably the one that you've just finished. Well,
I don't know. No, I'm not sure. I don't know whichever one gets edited first. That one, I presume.
Is that set in your neck of the woods again? The latest crime book, or?
No.
Oh.
I'm not going to say too much about it.
Tight-lipped. I like it. He's teasing us. Well, I look forward to hearing more about that. And as I mentioned in the epilogue, we'll have a bit more of a chat about podcasts in general. But so for now, whereabouts can people find you online, Matt?
Oh, I'm on Twitter. Mostly tweeting nonsense about cats and ghosts. At Concrete Kraken. And if you search my name on Facebook, you'll find my author page there. I don't have a personal Facebook, but I've got an author page on there that I occasionally update.
Well, I'll put all that in the show notes. And for now, thanks very much for joining us on Joined Up Writing.
Thank you, Wayne. It's been a pleasure.
There you go, that was Matt Wesolowski, and having now finished The Creepy Hydra, I highly recommend you to check it out along with its prequel 6 stories. I'll put all of those links in the show notes over at joinedupwriting.co.uk. That wraps things up for another week, but don't forget you can find the entire back catalogue of interviews on the website joinedupwriting.co.uk, and make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever else you find your podcasts, and then you can have the show downloaded automatically every week. Also, remember to get in touch with all your writing news, views, questions or comments, and tweet me with where you're listening to us or why you're enjoying this show in the first place, and I'll give you a mention in a future show. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly, happy writing and reading, and I'll see you next time.
Joined up